Good evening, coaches and the leadership group. Thank you guys for coming today. My name is Fachin, and today I'll be discussing caffeine. More so, what it is and why it may be effective for athletic performance. Today, I'll also be analysing the results of a case study that my colleagues and I worked on, where we kind of looked into caffeine and its effect on 10-kilometre watt bike time trials. This way, we're kind of giving you some actionable information to directly enhance your physical and mental output. So, what is caffeine? Well, to some, it's their morning coffee, the fuel that gets them from A to B, looking at you coaches. To others, it's that pre-workout or energy drink pep-up they need prior to conditioning night after a blowout loss on the weekend, looking at you athletes. Whoever you are, caffeine doesn't discriminate. It's a stimulant that can act as a performance enhancer depending on the certain contextual factors at hand. Graham, Paulson et al. Noted that caffeine may have a certain effect on the CNS as an adenosine receptor and may contribute to spikes in motor activation and have potential arousing effects. Warren et al. Also noted that caffeine may have a neuromuscular effect as well by increasing the stimulation of certain knee extensors in aerobic exercise. Van Dyke et al. Also noted that caffeine may have a certain vasodilating effect as it can increase the rates of adenosine, resulting in a hyperpolarization of the smooth muscle and causing a vasodilating effect, allowing more blood flow to the knee extensors. For as long as people have been taking their coffee black, often, like-minded individuals have been looking into the effects of caffeine and its associated effects on performance. Research into caffeine isn't new. In fact, over the last 10 to 12 years, research has taken profound leaps forward into caffeine and its associated effects. What we found is that common dosages of 2 to 5 milligrams per kilo have been a noticeable trend, which is something that we have based our case study design on. It is also common to see that the time trials, both time and distance-based, were used as testing protocols in these studies. Often, measures such as RPE scale, blood lactate, and heart rate were also common assessment tools when analysing the effect of caffeine on performance. In saying that, it was interesting to see the number of trials of these studies utilised, opting for a vast array of samples consisting of 2 or maybe more familiarization settings. Unfortunately, this is the total number of samples from our actual study. What my colleagues and I noticed is that there is a potential gap in research. We saw that a lot of the data, a lot of the studies were looking at the short-term effects of short aerobic and anaerobic activity. So what we want to look at is the effects of more longer duration exercise. So now that we're all up to speed on what caffeine and why it may be so great, I want to touch on now the case study that my colleagues and I looked at. What we really wanted to find out was the effect of the ingestion of 3 milligrams per kilo of caffeine and the effect that it'll have on, more so the improvement it'll have on a 10-kilometre watt bike time trial performance. The way my colleagues and I wanted to address our research question was by undertaking a double-blind, placebo-controlled case study. We started off with an initial screening consent session where we looked to analyse some body composition measures and figured out a little bit more about who our participant was. We found out that he was a semi-elite a soccer player, who did participate in casual leisure cycling every now and again. After we gained this information, we started off with our session. The session actually started 30 minutes prior, where our participant ingested 30 milligrams per kilo of caffeine or the placebo. 30 minutes later, we initiated the warm-up, where we would do 75 watts and 225 watts respectively, alternating every 30 seconds for the first 4 minutes, and then finishing off with 75 watts on the bike. Prior to and post warm-up, we would take blood lactate, RPE, and heart rate data samples before initiating the 10K time trial. Every kilometre, we would take RPE and heart rate data, and every 2.5 kilometres, we would take blood lactate samples. For a cool down, we would then do a 5-minute cool down of 75 watts on the bike to help return his heart rate to a normal level. As we transition into talking about the findings from our case study, I quickly just want to touch on two limitations that may provide more context to the results that we've seen. As previously discussed, other research studies have provided a vast array of sessions, including familiarization sessions and the sessions where they dosed in the trials. Our case study only had 2 sessions, and this number actually accounted for total familiarization sessions in these previous studies. Not only this, but our participant had completed a vigorous intensity football session within 12 hours of the second trial, this is when we found out that it was the caffeinated trial. And we noticed that he was more fatigued, as we can also reference slightly on our blood lactate graph. Now, looking at the results of blood lactate measures, it appears that the caffeinated trial saw an increased concentration of blood lactate. This is within reason, as both Graham-Paulson et al. And Anselmi et al. Both stipulated that an increase in blood lactate could be from an increase in calcium concentration. This could justify the results of the study, as calcium is a byproduct of the stretch shortening cycle. Calcium binds actins and myosin heads in the stretch shortening cycle. Again, this may potentially cause the results from the caffeine, as the 10-kilometer time trial was completed in 15 minutes and 27 seconds, 9 seconds faster than the placebo. Albeit a small improvement, it is a noticeable increase in workload. Straight away, your first impressions of these findings may not be that there is much going on. Now, there is some nuance that can justify what we are seeing, and we'll discuss that now. As we can see by looking at the graphs, it is apparent that there seems to be a small but measurable increase in heart rate through the intervals of the 10-kilometer time trial. A potential mechanism for the apparent increase in heart rate could be due to the role of caffeine acting antagonistically on adenosine by increasing catecholamine action. Associated effects may cause an increase in lipolysis, resulting in greater glucose uptake and distribution throughout the bloodstream. Another associated effect of caffeine acting antagonistically on adenosine is a potential transitory vasoconstrictory effect, as reported by Echeverry et al. That may contribute to what we can see in the graphs looking at heart rate. Due to the dilation of the blood vessels, more oxygenated blood is being supplied, thus being deoxygenated in the process. These effects may also contribute to what is at hand with regards to the RPE measures, more so in the initial periods of the time trials where the effects and mechanisms of caffeine are at their greatest. So what now? Well, it was my goal to give you guys as coaches and athletes some actionable advice to help potentially increase your performance. Now, for as long as you're meeting big ticket items like recovery, your sleep, your nutrition, your training intensity is appropriate and you're recovering from that, then you can start to look at dosing in caffeine. And the way I suggest doing that is by getting a coffee machine in the change rooms. Have 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 espressos, maybe before a big training or a game, to help really benefit your physical performance outcomes. Now, although our case study didn't find any huge game-changing results, there does appear to be some reasonable evidence to suggest that caffeine, whether you're a responder or not, may benefit your performance. Now, if you're chasing those 1%ers to have an influential performance on the weekend, on that big game, then I would suggest maybe having an espresso or some caffeine before the game to really help you get an edge over your competition. Thank you everyone for listening. I'll talk to you next time. Thank you.